Hello, my name is Keith, and welcome to Wray in the Bay, tire pressure monitoring system, the virtual tire kick. Where has this technology been all my life? I could have used it exactly twice that I remember, and it would have saved me considerable amounts of stress and time. Most recently was on a ATV, a four-wheeler that I was fixing up a few years ago. I'm not a ATV person really, but I thought it'd be fun to drive around. So I trailered this abused machine home to hopefully turn it into a farm vehicle. I replaced the battery, I changed the oil and the filters, etc. The tires were all flat, so I aired them up to 32 psi each. That's a standard tire pressure, right? It looked great, like a lift kit had been installed that made it sit up like a monster truck, ready to drive over a long row of Ford Pintos. Time for a drive. I crossed the creek to cruise around the property a little bit. This thing was like riding a bucking bronco. I could barely hang on. So I bounced back to the house. As I eased into the yard, my good friend pulled in. Rodney asked me, he said, "How much tire pressure you're running?" When I told him, he laughed and said, "Bless your heart, you only need about 5 psi." "I bet you had a rough ride," he said. I just laughed and said I was going for better fuel efficiency and ground clearance. I'm pretty sure a tire pressure monitoring system would have told me I was overinflated by a lot. The second incident took place this summer. I decided to take some time off from the auto repair business and drive a dump truck for a while. I hauled rock and gravel in a 1968 International tandem axle truck. One week I got the call to haul hot asphalt to pave a grocery store parking lot. I was told to show up at the asphalt plant at a certain time, wet the dump bed down with diesel fuel so the asphalt wouldn't stick to it. Oh, told not to dawdle because the asphalt cools, it starts to harden, makes it tougher to smooth out. If it cools too much, it can harden to the point it won't dump. Then it has to be removed with a pick and a shovel by me. So with all that in mind and 18 tons of very hot material loaded, I quickly headed toward that grocery store. This load was so hot I could feel it through the back window. That and no AC in the cab had me sweating like the pilot in the movie Satire Airplane. Remember that? As I was headed down the old Route 66, the truck started pulling hard to the right. Eventually, I just had to pull over to the shoulder. The right front was all but flat. That old adage, "it's only flat on one side," was not a bit funny at that moment. I could picture myself with a pickaxe tossing 18 tons of hardened asphalt into a ditch somewhere. So no cell phone in those days, so it was up to me to save the day. I got busy and swapped the flat front tire with one of the axle dual wheels, and I was back on the road ASAP, maybe 30 minutes. I arrived at the parking lot to an upset paving contractor, asking where in the heck have I been? I told him what happened, but he just kept hollering at me about hardening asphalt. My young man's temper got the best of me, and I shouted back, "Do you want this load or not?" The 30 seconds it took him to think about that seemed like an hour to me because I was trying to remember where my pickaxe was. He finally said, "Back up to the paving machine." Boy, that could have gone very bad. Later, when the lot was complete and cooler heads prevailed, he told me that I drove a straighter line than anybody he'd ever seen pulling the paver. I told him I enjoyed being a part of his team that week. This isn't that great? This is how a couple mule-headed men apologize to one another. I'm quite positive a tire pressure monitor system, a TPMS, would have warned me of that low tire, maybe even before I filled it up with hot asphalt. The tire pressure monitor systems of days gone by was to kick the tire, check for a hard pressurized tire. Between that and a visual check, that's what we had, short of just putting the tire gauge to work. Modern day TPMS is a virtual tire kick that has developed into a highly accurate safety device. The very first TPMS vehicle was a 1986 Porsche 959. The first in the US was a 1997 Corvette. It also used the first Schrader TPMS. In the early 2000s, there was a US OEM that recalled vehicles due to rollover issues that happened due to tire failures. Unfortunately, there had been 279 deaths and 14.4 million tires were involved. This triggered a law that mandated TPMS in all vehicles under 10,000 pounds to notify the driver when a tire is below 25% with a warning light. In the U.S., this law went into effect in 2008. A similar law passed in the European Union and in the UK in 2012. So tire pressure monitoring systems are designed to alert the driver to low tire pressures while the vehicle is traveling as well as stationary. Low pressure is responsible for many accidents and breakdowns. Incorrect pressure also has a negative effect on fuel economy, emissions, and tire wear. There are three methods for measuring the pressure. They are as follows. One, a coded tire valve with a unique identifier mounted within the load wheel. Second, a coded tire valve with transmitter mounted externally from the road wheel. And three, an indirect system using output from the ABS wheel sensors. Those first two methods use a radio frequency of 315 or 433 megahertz to relay pressure data to the control module. They also use a non-replaceable lithium-ion battery with a 7 to 10 year lifespan. That third method I mentioned that uses the wheel speed sensors to calculate the pressure. Low pressure results in a reduced tire circumference, doesn't it? That's going to alter the wheel speed sensor. Overinflation increases that circumference, which will also show up in that wheel speed sensor. Once the TPMS is replaced, they may need to be calibrated, depending on the OEM, to read the correct tire pressure based on the vehicle specification. Some vehicles have specific needs such as towing or high load, which will need the tire pressure to be set higher. Up-to-date Snap-on tools have quick lookups, which includes OEM-specific tire and wheel service information. It has remove and repair instructions, functional reset procedures through the scan tool, as well as a manual reset procedure after a sensor is replaced. Note that a TPMS relearn tool like the TPMS 4 or 5 may be needed for certain OEMs. For diagnosing the tire pressure monitor system, Snap-on scan tools offer codes, current codes, history codes, and clear codes. By the way, the relatively new Solus Plus with 24.4 software can easily be switched from English to Spanish and back. So all this TPMS information and data is now available in Spanish. So trouble codes. It may include issues such as tire pressure too low or high, defective tire pressure sensors, a faulty TPMS control unit, faulty wiring, or a TPMS reset is needed. So the TPM system also will have data display available on many scan tools. It will offer various data depending on the OEM, of course, things like, well, air pressure, obviously, maybe even tire temperatures. Some will list the registration ID, vehicle speed, sensor battery voltage may be there. In fact, some may even show battery remaining service life, and that'll be in months. Additional functional tests are special functions like tire pressure adaptation, manual procedures, and right tire position are available for certain OEMs. So tire pressure monitors are definitely more accurate and safer than kicking the tires. Plus, they will monitor the tires at 70 miles per hour. A tire kick at that speed might be a bit of a challenge. So what's next? An onboard air compressor to adjust tire pressure at 70 miles per hour? Listen, at this point in my career, I would not rule out anything this industry comes up with. So, thank you for joining me on another edition of Wray in the Bay.